Google Maps covers over 98% of the world's surface. It has photographed the inside of the Amazon jungle, the floor of the Mariana Trench, and the summit of Everest. But in Australia, there are places the map goes deliberately quiet, locations where the resolution drops without explanation, where street-level imagery stops at the gate, where user photographs have been systematically removed, and where what appears to be empty desert is hiding something enormous underground. Some of these gaps are deliberate government decisions. Some are made by communities protecting their own country. Some are hiding things that were built, then buried, then forgotten. And at least one is a place the Australian government pays to keep offshore and off-map simultaneously. Stay for number 1. It is not a military base, not a nuclear facility, and not a spy installation. It is a rock. And the reason it has been removed from public digital maps is one of the most significant precedents in the history of mapping rights anywhere in the world. Number 5. HMAS Stirling Fleet Base West, Garden Island, Western Australia. HMAS Stirling, on Garden Island off the coast of Rockingham in Western Australia, is the home port of Australia's Indian Ocean Surface Fleet and the primary base for the submarine force. Under the AUKUS agreement, the defence partnership between Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom, the base is undergoing major expansion to accommodate nuclear-powered submarines beginning from 2027. It is also a connection point for secure undersea communication cables running along Australia's northern and western coastlines. On public mapping platforms, the base is subjected to resolution limits that prevent detailed imaging of submarine docks, dry docks, shipyard infrastructure, and communication terminals. These restrictions are targeted rather than comprehensive. Garden Island is visible in general outline, but the operational detail of the base infrastructure is consistently rendered below the threshold at which meaningful tactical analysis would be possible. The AUKUS expansion makes HMAS Stirling one of the most strategically significant construction sites in Australia through the late 2020s. The combination of nuclear-capable vessel access, undersea cable infrastructure, and allied military integration places it firmly in the category of installations where the gap between what is publicly visible and what is operationally significant is deliberately maintained. Number 10. The Yanga Detention District, Nauru. Open Google Maps and zoom in on the small Pacific island nation of Nauru. The island is tiny, about 21 square kilometers, and most of it renders in reasonable resolution for a remote Pacific location. Then zoom in on the Yanga district on the eastern side of the island. The image degrades visibly. The resolution drops. The detail that is clear elsewhere on the island becomes a blurred grid over this specific area. Yanga is where Australia's offshore immigration processing facilities are located. The facilities have been the subject of sustained human rights scrutiny for over a decade. Reporting on conditions inside them has been severely restricted under successive Australian governments. The blurred satellite grid over Yanga on public mapping platforms is consistent with a deliberate resolution cap applied to limit detailed overhead monitoring of the site from the air. It is worth being precise about what this means and what it does not mean. The blurring does not hide the existence of the facilities. They are documented extensively through on-the-ground reporting, legal proceedings, and official government statements. What the resolution cap limits is the ability to conduct detailed spatial analysis of the site's layout, capacity, and physical condition from orbit. The irony is predictable. The Streisand effect applies cleanly here. The visual degradation over Yanga draws the eye directly to the district, transforming the censored zone into the first thing anyone notices when they look at Nauru on a map. Number 9. The Williams Creek Tunnel, Melbourne. Beneath Elizabeth Street in Melbourne, there is a river. It has been there for tens of thousands of years. The Wurundjeri people knew it as a waterway flowing through a valley into the Yarra. European settlers in the 19th century built over it, enclosed it in a brick-lined tunnel, and paved the road above it. On every public digital map, Elizabeth Street appears as a standard urban road. The creek does not exist, except during heavy storms. When the rainfall is sufficient, Williams Creek overflows its underground channel, floods up through the stormwater grates, and briefly reasserts itself on the surface of Elizabeth Street, a waterway reappearing in the middle of a city that officially erased it from its maps. The flooding is a regular event, documented and reported, and it happens directly above a creek that no digital map will show you. This is not a classified secret and not a deliberate government censorship decision. It is something more interesting, a case where the built environment was so comprehensively layered over a natural feature that the natural feature simply ceased to exist in the cartographic record. What the maps show is what humans put on the surface. What is actually there, underneath the road, under the footpaths, under the foundations of Victorian-era buildings, belongs to a geography that pre-exists the city by an order of magnitude. Williams Creek is still flowing beneath Elizabeth Street right now. It is just not on the map. Number 8. The Nullarbor Cave Network, South Australia and Western Australia. From orbit, the Nullarbor Plain appears as one of the most featureless landscapes on Earth, a flat limestone expanse crossed by the straight lines of the Trans-Australian Railway and the Air Highway, extending for hundreds of kilometres without a visible hill, valley, or break in the surface. The resolution on public mapping platforms is relatively low for this region. It is remote, sparsely populated, and commercial satellite providers allocate their high-resolution imaging capacity to areas with larger audiences. What the satellite cannot see from the surface is what is directly below it. The Nullarbor sits on a massive subterranean limestone cave system, one of the most extensive in the southern hemisphere. These underground passages contain Pleistocene megafauna fossils, remains of giant marsupials, ancient wombats, and other megafauna that disappeared from Australia thousands of years ago, along with indigenous archaeological sites of considerable significance. The caves are fragile, scientifically extraordinary, and almost entirely absent from public digital maps, which can only photograph the surface. This is natural obscuration rather than deliberate censorship, but the effect is identical. An enormous feature of the Australian landscape simply does not appear on any public map. The satellite looks down at limestone and sees limestone. Everything that makes the Nullarbor extraordinary is invisible from orbit, hidden by the same flat surface that makes the plain look like nothing at all. Number 7. Harold E. Holt Naval Communication Station, Exmouth, Western Australia. The Harold E. Holt Naval Communication Station on the Northwest Cape near Exmouth is one of the most visually distinctive military installations in Australia. 12 massive antenna towers, some reaching 387 metres in height, among the tallest structures in the southern hemisphere, transmit very low-frequency radio signals deep into the ocean, enabling secure communication with submerged submarines operating across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. On public mapping platforms, the towers themselves are visible from orbit. What the mapping platforms do not show at high resolution is the detailed layout of the station's communication arrays, tracking sensors, and operational infrastructure. The station also houses an advanced space surveillance telescope, operated in partnership with the US Space Force, which tracks objects in deep orbit. The combination of submarine communications capability and space surveillance makes Harold E. Holt one of the most strategically sensitive sites on Australian soil. The resolution limits applied around the station on public platforms are targeted and consistent, clear enough to identify the general site and the towers, detailed enough to limit analysis of the specific technical infrastructure. The Northwest Cape also has a specific connection to recent events. Cyclone Narelle hit Exmouth in March 2026, causing significant structural damage to the town. The images of cyclone destruction that circulated after the storm provided more detailed visual documentation of the Northwest Cape region than the deliberately limited satellite imagery on Google Maps typically allows. Weather events, it turns out, are harder to resolution cap than mapping platforms. Number 6. Pine Gap Joint Defence Facility, Northern Territory. 20 kilometres southwest of Alice Springs, in a shallow valley surrounded by low ranges, there is a cluster of white geodetic domes, golf ball-shaped radomes that house the antenna arrays of the Joint Defence Facility Pine Gap. The domes are visible from the road and from orbit. What they are doing is considerably less transparent. Pine Gap is operated jointly by the Australian Signals Directorate and the US Central Intelligence Agency. It is one of the central nodes of the Echelon network, the signals intelligence infrastructure that collects satellite transmissions, metadata, and communication intercepts across the Eastern Hemisphere. The facility processes intelligence that feeds directly into the Five Eyes sharing arrangement between Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and New Zealand. On public mapping platforms, the white domes are visible, but the site is subjected to strict data and resolution limits that prevent detailed analysis of its antenna configurations, facility layout, and technical infrastructure. The Defence, Special Undertakings, Act 1952 makes unauthorised entry to the Pine Gap restricted area a federal criminal offence carrying substantial penalties. This is the same legislation that makes entering Emu Field, the unremediated 1953 nuclear test site, punishable by up to 7 years in prison. Pine Gap sits in the middle of the Northern Territory, surrounded by spinifex and red earth, entirely visible and entirely opaque simultaneously. The geodetic domes are one of the most recognised landmarks in Central Australia. Almost nobody knows what is inside them. Number 4. Lucas Heights Nuclear Reactor, New South Wales. Subscribe before number 3, because that entry is about an intelligence facility in the desert where the antennas dwarf most buildings in Australia, and what it communicates to is under the ocean. But first, the nuclear reactor in Sydney's southern suburbs. The open-pool Australian light water reactor at Lucas Heights in southern Sydney is operated by the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation. It is not a power reactor. It produces medical isotopes used in diagnostic imaging and cancer treatment across Australia, and supports scientific research across multiple disciplines. It sits in a suburban context that most visitors to Sydney would never suspect contained nuclear infrastructure. When Google Earth launched in 2005, the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation requested that high-resolution imagery of the facility be removed from public view, citing the risk that detailed overhead images could assist threat planning. The Australian federal government declined to formally support the security concern, taking the position that publicly available commercial satellite imagery did not provide meaningful uplift for threat actors, and Google ultimately restored the high-resolution imagery after a period of obscuration. Lucas Heights is now visible on public mapping platforms without significant resolution restriction. But the episode established the template for how Australian institutions approach the question of critical infrastructure and commercial mapping, a negotiation between transparency, security concern, and the practical limits of what satellite imagery can actually reveal about how a facility operates. The reactor is visible. What it is doing remains opaque regardless of image resolution. Number 3. Argula Hill, Arnhem Land, Northern Territory. Argula Hill is a geological feature in Arnhem Land with deep spiritual and cultural significance to the First Nations community whose country it sits within. From orbit, the hill is visible. At the level of street level and user-contributed panoramic imagery, something unusual has happened. The photographs that users have uploaded of the site have been blurred. Not by Google, by the photographers themselves. This is self-censorship, a deliberate decision by people who visited and photographed the site to obscure the images before uploading them to public platforms. The blurring protects sacred features from digital exposure, while still allowing the community and its supporters to share images of the broader landscape. It is a form of cartographic sovereignty exercised not by governments or corporations but by individuals making choices about what aspects of a place should be visible to the public and what should remain private. The practice reflects something important about the relationship between digital mapping and cultural authority. The camera can see the hill. The satellite can photograph it. The question of whether that image should be publicly accessible, at what resolution, and showing what features, is a question that the affected community has answered for itself. Not by lobbying a corporation or petitioning a government, but by editing the images before they were shared. Number 2. The Prime Minister's residence, Canberra. The lodge on Adelaide Avenue in Canberra is the official residence of the Prime Minister of Australia. On Google Earth, the roof of the building is pixelated. The main entrance on Adelaide Avenue is blurred on street view. These are not natural image artifacts or resolution limitations related to the property's remoteness. They are deliberate, targeted obscurations of specific structural features of a specific building. The pixelation of the roofline prevents detailed analysis of the property's layout, chimney configuration, and any rooftop security assets. The blurring of the entrance prevents public study of security checkpoints, vehicle access arrangements, and the physical configuration of the gate. The Australian government generally takes a relaxed approach to commercial satellite mapping. It declined to support permanent censorship of Lucas Heights, and its official position is that public high-resolution satellite imagery does not typically pose a significant national security risk. The lodge is one of the clear exceptions to that general permissiveness. The blurring also extends, in more limited form, to other executive security sites. During the APEC Forum in Sydney in September 2007, certain central business district locations had their resolution intentionally reduced on public platforms ahead of the event, a targeted, temporary modification that demonstrated the capacity to alter commercial mapping in response to security events when the government chose to exercise it. Number 1. Uluru, Northern Territory. Uluru does not appear blurred on Google Maps. The resolution is not reduced. The satellite imagery is clear and high definition. What has been removed is something different: the ability to virtually climb it. Before October 2019, users of Google Maps and Google Earth could navigate 360-degree panoramic images of the Uluru summit, uploaded by visitors who had made the climb and shared their photographs to the platform's user-contributed imagery system. The physical climb up the rock was one of Australia's most controversial tourist activities. For the Anangu people, the traditional owners of the land, the climb was a violation of their ancestral laws. The summit is a sacred site connected to the Chukopa, the Anangu law and knowledge system that defines their relationship to country. They had asked visitors not to climb for decades. In October 2019, Parks Australia permanently closed the physical climb. But the virtual climb persisted. Users could still navigate the summit panoramas on Google Maps, following the route digitally, looking out from a place whose sacred status the Anangu had never recognized as a public viewpoint. In September 2020, Parks Australia formally requested that Google remove all user-generated panoramic imagery of the Uluru summit. They argued that the digital tours violated the wishes of the traditional owners and contravened the National Parks photography and filming guidelines. Google complied. The summit imagery was systematically removed from the platform. The virtual climb was closed. This is the precedent that makes Uluru number 1 on this list. Every other location here was removed from public view by governments protecting military assets, by corporations managing security liability, by communities protecting sacred information through self-censorship, or by the simple technical limitation that satellites cannot see underground. Uluru is the case where a First Nations community's assertion of cultural authority over a sacred site resulted in a global mapping corporation changing what the world was allowed to see, not through legislation, not through government pressure, but through a direct request grounded in Indigenous rights. The rock is still there on the map. The resolution has not been reduced. What has been removed is the assumption that being able to photograph something means the public has the right to access it. Maps have always been instruments of power. The Dutch East India Company censored its charts to protect trade routes. James Cook falsified the shape of Tasmania to deny European rivals a safe harbour. The Australian government blurs the roof of the lodge and resolution caps its submarine bases. And a First Nations community in Central Australia successfully asked one of the most powerful technology companies in the world to stop letting strangers walk across their sacred country from behind a screen. The map is never just the map. It is a record of who controls what is known, what is visible, and what is allowed to be seen. In Australia in 2026, that negotiation is happening on more fronts simultaneously than at any point in the history of the continent. If you want more of the stories behind the map, subscribe. We go deep every week.